Helen Fraser, Managing Director of the Penguin Group. Welcome to the London Book Fair podcast. Now, you're into your last month of a 12-year career at Penguin. You're contemplating a new life as Chief Executive of the Girls' Day School Trust and as a non-executive of Francis Lincoln, whose founder was an old friend, I think. How do you feel? Sad? Liberated?
Definitely not liberated, absolutely not. I've loved every minute of my publishing career, even the bumpier passages, of which there have been several. Yes. But I shall miss it a lot.
Your career began at Methuen in 1972 when it was part of ABP and a real power in the land.
Yes, I mean what I did, John had a system where people worked for him for a year and you typed all his letters, as you did in those days, from a dictaphone, because I didn't have shorthand, on a typewriter with carbon paper and Tipex, quite a lot of Tipex in my case. And in the sort of intervening gaps, you were taught how to copy, edit and proofread, and indeed edit manuscripts. So very quickly he gave me sort of proper structural editing work to do. And at the end of the year, there was either a job for you or there wasn't. And if there wasn't, you got chucked out. And I was very lucky, there was a job in what was then a sort of copy editing department. But John gave me lots of rope and allowed me to go off and see authors and sign up books, which I did at a great old rate. My first book that I signed up was also Hermione Lee's first book, which was a critical book on Virginia Woolf. And the
really?
two subjects I specialised in were literary criticism, about which I knew something, and sociology of education, about which I knew nothing. But it was an education itself.
You went to Fontana, which walked the line between academia and quality popular non-fiction.
It was a very good gentle lead-in to publishing for a much more general readership.
Norman Stone, Simon Sharma.
Yeah, Norman Stone, Simon Sharma, The Embarrassment of Riches, which I think was his first book I commissioned. Martin Gilbert's book on the Holocaust I commissioned. So it was enormous fun, and I had, a really good time and learned a huge amount. And by the end of my time there, I was publishing hardbacks as well as paperbacks, and literary fiction as well as non-fiction. So it was a sort of broadening opportunity.
Of course, just plain Collins then, is still owned by the family.
It was called Collins,
yes.
Exactly.
Then, of course, in 1987, Collins, which was still Collins and owned by the Collins family, had one of its periodic Nights of the Long Knives, and you and quite a number of distinguished colleagues were left out in the cold. You joined Heinemann, actually, when it was on the cusp of becoming Reed Consumer Books, but it wasn't quite, was it?
Yes, I think when they hired me, it was owned by Paul Hamlin and was part of the Octopus Group. And about a week after I joined, he sold the whole Octopus Group, including Heinemann, to Reed Elsevier for, I think, £550 million. And it was that period where publishing suddenly became extraordinarily fashionable in the city. Octopus was a kind of financial publishing miracle, and Reed clearly overpaid, but they didn't realise at the time. And one of the immediate consequences of that was that Heinemann lost its half share of Pan. So I found myself running a hardback house with no corresponding paperback house into which to publish, which was quite a challenge, especially as most of our major authors we naturally shared with Pan. Yes. So there was a kind of tug of war over people like Jackie Collins, Wilbur Smith,
indeed,
Claire Francis, who was going to get the paperback.
Oh, it was quite when you started Mandarin and Minerva, of course.
We did, yes,
to take those books, but it was quite a tussle because there were lots of discussions over licenses and reversions.
Exactly.
It was much more so than the Penguin acquisition of the Thomson companies a couple of years earlier. Yes. It was a much bloodier and more difficult time, wasn't it?
It was bloodier because I think it was being at the paperback, trying to start a paperback company, yes, in a market which already had so many very, very well-established players. And it was very difficult to persuade authors to be with Mandarin, which was a list they'd never heard of, yes, rather than go and sell their paperback rights to Pan. So it was quite difficult. But we did manage to do authors like Thomas Harris with Silence of the Lambs. Of course, yes. We sold over 1 million copies in a year. I mean, there were some great successes in hardback and paperback. So
that was a 10-year period again, and then Reed Consumer Books was sold. And you came to Penguin, eventually bringing with you Tom Weldon and Louise Moore.
Yes, I was sort of, in a sense, rescued from the sinking ship by Anthony Forbes Watson, because what happened is Reed was for sale for 2 years, which was a very difficult period where we tried to hold all the authors and staff on board. And then Reed announced that they weren't going to sell us. And we had a rather great year where Sandy Grant and I went round to all the agents and said, we've now got a really stable future and it's all great. And then one morning in November, Sandy was summoned in at 8 o'clock and fired, and told essentially that the company was back for sale again, but we didn't know who was going to buy it. And I think either the next day or possibly even later that day, I had a call from Anthony saying, I don't want to seem vulturish, but would you be interested in talking about moving to Penguin? So I said yes, and so we had various conversations, and I moved to Penguin in January 1997, and Tom and Louise followed shortly after. And of course, one of the things that did was enable the commercial publishing at Penguin under the sort of Michael Joseph label to get off to the most terrific rocket-like start, because Louise brought with her Sue Townsend, Marion Keyes, Jane Green, lots of the names that have really built that list and become kind of iconic authors.
Now, of course, at Reed, in your 10 years there, and particularly in your 12 years at Penguin, you've spent much more time developing and nurturing editorial talent than you have authorial talent. Has that given you as much pleasure as working with authors has done down the years?
It has, very much. And in fact, when I came to Penguin, I decided that when I left Reed, I had 25 authors, and they included people like V.S. Naipaul, Antonia Fraser, Thomas Harris. And because I was managing director of Reed Consumer Books when I left, I was finding it increasingly difficult to juggle looking after authors in the way that they need and deserve to be looked after, and actually managing a whole division and the people and the P&L and so on. So when I came to Penguin, I decided I wouldn't have authors. I'd simply have brilliant editors, and they would have authors, and my job would be to manage the editors, the marketing people, the rights people, the designers, and so on. But I really enjoy it.
Yeah.
I love it, and it's the thing that makes my job exciting. And I think, of course, partly it's exciting because of the quality of people I work with.
I mean, is that what, in a sense, you're most proud of, that you've nurtured a generation?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I'm very proud of the fact that the team stepping up at Penguin, who are they're all a lot younger than me, they're all in their early to mid-40s, but they're all people I've hired and in many cases have worked with for, like Tom, for over 20 years. And they're all great, and they are going to run this company fabulously, I hope, for the next 15 years.
Now, we're at an interesting point in publishing, the e-book versus the real book, or the traditional book, however we like to look at it. Do you think the publishing model will be recognisable 10 years from now, or do you think it'll be so totally changed?
It's very hard to know, but I have a feeling that we are possibly at the tipping point of really radical change in our industry, that in 10 years' time our customers will not be the customers we have today. They'll probably be Google and others who we don't even know about. I think the digital thing, it's very hard to predict, but certainly in America now, ebooks seem to be taking off in such a big way. I've always been a bit of an ebook skeptic and have always, for a very long time, believed that they would never represent more than maybe 10% of total book sales, that the physical book would still be very powerful. But I'm not quite so sure anymore, and I'm quite glad that steering a publishing course through what might be very dramatic change is being done by somebody a lot younger than me, who I think will be up for what might be a very different publishing landscape.
Helen Fraser, thank you very much.